It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman, and he's eating pie. Or if he's gonna eat a food, you're probably gonna see him eat that at some point. When it comes to the Man of Steel, there is no shortage of iconography. From the hair curl to the trunks, the costume itself, the glasses. But some things, while less bombastic, are equally baked into the character. And yes, that pun was fully intended. One such trait is Superman's love of pie. Now, depending upon when you came into comics, you may be more or less aware of this. For example, post-Crisis during the John Byrne run, they went out of their way to actually say which pie it was. Rhubarb pie, specifically made by his mom. In the Rebirth era, you had the Thanksgiving where you saw him eating pie. There was also, from that New 52 era, the Dark Side War, where he got a little possessed and went a bit crazy for pie.
I said, give me my pie!
Such examples aside though, Superman is often seen casually enjoying pie as a treat.
Apple pie.
The devil's food.
Something tells me this isn't about dessert.
Also note that in that context of Young Justice, Batman likes cake. And that's also very interesting. Now for many, this may just come across as, yeah, Clark likes pie, so what? But there's more to it than pie being delicious. There's a deeper meaning behind Superman's love of pie, or at least there appears to be. It's one that's deeply tied with the character's history and symbolism and what he's come to embody over time. At times it appears to be at play consciously, at other times subconsciously. But to get into that, we've got to look at a couple of things, not just the history of Superman as a quintessential American hero, at least that being the way he's generally perceived, but we also need to look at the symbolic evolution of pie. We gotta look at the links between pie, patriotism, traditional values, and the linkage of pie to Americana. So grab your beverage and pie of choice and your pie accoutrement of choice as well. Is it ice cream? Is it cheese? I actually eat with cheese. It's not weird. Let's talk pie and the Man of Steel. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, Whim City, here we go. Also, do you like what I've done with the place? It's subtly different. We're changing it up. But the most important thing, did you notice? The glasses. No longer an anime villain. For now.
How's the pie?
So good.
Pie, as a food, obviously predates Superman by quite a bit. It's existed for millennia and evolved over time. It's had different names, but you can find references to something that most certainly was pie as far back as ancient Egypt. The Roman cookbook Apicius from the 1st century has a pie case recipe. It says pie has a long and storied pedigree, and the evolution of it in various areas is quite fascinating. For us, we're heading to North America for the pie history there, but if you hang out in Europe, and then you can see the rise of sweet pie in the 15th century, the rise of pure fruit pies and not dried fruit or mixed with other things pies. You have the first recorded instance of a pure fruit pie in the 16th century, served to Queen Elizabeth I, a cherry pie. And again, we have to say recorded instances. There may have been secret pies lurking about. Sweet pies really rose to prominence with the availability of sugar. Before that, savory pies were the hotness. Now, as pie makes its way through history, something interesting happens. When it arrives in America in the 17th century, it eventually becomes a bit of a staple. Of course, it arrives pre-independence. And the recipes of the various immigrants begins to marry with the available ingredients on the land, as well as what they bring with them and introduce. Everything begins to merge and evolve, and you go from more tart-like things, the introduction of apples and how easy they are to grow over in America, and then also the Dutch bring over some spices. But as this went on, what pie was in the quote-unquote New World began to cement itself. And there were many reasons why pie became a bit more popular during the settling era. Pies took less flour than bread. You could use them with multiple ingredients and they could then be stretched out. And it was this provisional nature that was part of what saw the rise of apples as a popular ingredient. You could preserve them, you could dry them, they were naturally sweet. And with the colonization of the Caribbean and the introduction of sugar, you were able to then make them even sweeter still. And so the rise in popularity of apple pie began to take place. It began to be associated with colonial life, and hence in a larger sense with the concept of America, as it itself began to coalesce as an idea. And that would continue post-independence. Pie would just evolve from the 17th century onward. More spices, more techniques, and it indeed became so entrenched and so popular that there began to be battles about its merit, its nutritional merit. This in the 1800s, where you saw a bit of a rise in the popularity of nutrition as a science and the concept of having to eat healthy food. Now, the debates of this era did not center around whether or not pie had too much sugar or not, or whether it was too fatty or not. No, it wasn't about that. It was rather about the idea that pies were hard to digest, and that anything that was hard to digest was bad for you. And they tended to hone in on the idea that it was because it had a crust, it was just too much. There was an anti-pie top covering movement, to which I say nay, or well, it depends on the pie. pie. But in general, pie with a top covering, please. Where do you stand on that? If it doesn't have a covering, is automatically a tart? Discuss. I think the best quote I found about this came from an article from an 1866 issue of Harper's Magazine. It was by C.W. Gessner, and it stated, oh yes, I have quotes about pie. We are fond of pies and tarts. We cry for pie when we are infants. Pie in countless varieties waits upon us through life. Pie kills us, finally. I like the drama. It's very dramatic. We have apple pie, peach pie, rhubarb pie, pumpkin pie, plum pie, custard pie, oyster pie, lemon pie, and hosts of other pies. Potatoes are diverted from their proper place as boiled or baked and made into a nice heavy crust. Don't discriminate like that. Boil them, mash them, bake them in a pie. Okay, back to the quote. Diverted from their proper places, boiled or baked, and made into a nice heavy crust for these pies, rendering them incapable of being acted on by the gastric juice, as if they were sulfate verita, a chemical which boiling vitriol will hardly dissolve. How can a person with a pound of green apples and fat dough in his stomach be at ease? Now I just want pie. Also note that they were referencing apple pie as like the staple stand-in place pie, because apple comes to be the symbol of American pies. It was even stated first. The Century Cookbook from 1895 also took some time out to bash pie, stating, "The American pie is perhaps the most ridiculed of dishes. It has, however, great popularity and undoubted merits. The mince pie, probably the most indigestible of all, is the one universally accepted as a treat and seldom refused by the scoffer." I love the idea of pie scoffers. Just an anti-pie league. Now all of this is to lay the groundwork and showcase that pie was important in the American cultural landscape. It had become part of the national mythology, a staple and traditional food. And there were other discussions about it outside of its nutritional merits, or lack thereof, and those were of its character. In the early 1900s, there were examples linking pie with heroism. The concept of pie as something imbuing strength and moral fortitude, perhaps a holdover from its historical link to settling the nation, was on full display. Plus, someone had to come out and counteract the pie bashing, which was still going on in 1902, which is where we have a passionate defense of pie. In 1902, there was a New York Times article with a rousing defense of pie. It appears to be responding to something that was saying that people should eat less of it. Nutritionists apparently alleging that you should eat pie only once or twice a week, and not every day. I actually agree with that, but not for the reasons that they're saying. However, this rebuttal very much has the sentiment of give me pie or give me death. It is utterly insufficient, as anyone who knows the secret of our strength as a nation and the foundation of our industrial supremacy must admit. Pie is the American synonym of prosperity, and its varying contents mark the calendar of the changing seasons. Pie is the food of the heroic. No pie-eating people can ever be vanquished. Yeah. Pie. So at this point, it can clearly be seen that pie is not only an established part of Americana, but there is a pride about it and intense symbolism and passion. The idea that it embodies more than just a food. It's heroism, it's home, it's family, a part of the fabric of a very nation, and it's still debated to this day whether it should be or not, as well as the other merits of pie. Now, where does Superman enter the equation? Well, he appears on the scene in 1938 in Action Comics #1, created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And while it would take him a little bit to get off the ground, literally and figuratively, as it was for a time Captain Marvel Billy Batson, who is the #1 comic book hero over at Fawcett Comics, Superman would quickly become a powerhouse symbol. And he would also come to embody strong traditional American values, and eventually be placed in the mindscape as the quintessential American hero. A position that some are comfortable with and others aren't. It varies. That's not what we're here today about. We're here about pie. A combination of radio show and patriotism throughout the Second World War would help cement Superman in the minds of the populace. There was just something extremely accessible about his story from the start, with its parallels to the immigrant story, the fantasy fulfillment of being able to save the day and maintain anonymity, also just the strength that the character embodied. And over the years, the association would grow and grow, as with the character's popularity and adaptability, and he just proved to be fun, as the character would evolve and become more honed over time. But also during the Golden Age, while Superman was rising up, there was also a growing association with pie and patriotism thanks to the Second World War. You may have heard the phrase, as American as apple pie. Now that actually predates the Second World War, but it's said that that's where some of the phrasing when soldiers would describe what they were fighting for would arise from. During the Second World War, there are quotes from soldiers saying that they were fighting for mom and apple pie, meaning that apple pie was synonymous with home, comfort, family. So if you skip forward a bit and then you look at, for example, the Burn Run, that makes it doubly significant when Superman says that his favorite pie is made by his mom. It's all those things combining. He's going back home to the Midwest to have his favorite food made by his mom, a pie. It's rhubarb pie, not an apple pie. falling down. I guess the apple pie would have been just too on the nose. Apple pie was included in the first American cookbook post-independence, American Cookery. Now, it must be noted that even at the time, there was some pushback against the idea of pie being quintessentially American, and that time being the 1940s, as there was an acknowledgement and general knowledge that the ingredients that were being used were not actually native to America, which is a counter-argument that you will still see employed as late as 2023. People are still debating whether people should say that apple pie is American or not. The thing is, whether it is or isn't, the symbolism and the feeling of it have definitely become embodied into that narrative. It becomes one of those things where even if technically it's not, at the same time, figuratively and metaphorically, it can be, if one is willing to accept it as such. It just depends on where one's headspace is. Anyway, here's a counter argument from 1946. The old saying, as American as apple pie, is a bit misleading, for the chief ingredient of our national dessert is American only by adoption. But you see, even in that pushback, it's acknowledged that it's a national dessert. In order to push back against it, the idea has to be established. The association with apple pie in America would only grow and come to be reinforced in the media. It's still acknowledged, even if it's not actively said, as a concept, the idea that apple pie, oh, Americana. Even if it is at times, time recording, viewed as a bit quaint. Now, back in the 40s, thanks to the war, that association with apple pie would extend past the examples of folk tales like Johnny Appleseed, who was also a real person, but to the concept of real-life heroism and sacrifice. Fighting and dying for pie, meaning fighting and dying for America. Of course, there were nuances and harsh realities, but we're dealing in the mythologies of ideas surrounding these things. Superman, of course, was also caught up in this wartime push with comics that were pushing to sell war bonds or having some war-themed stories. So in this way, these heroes were also embroiled in this fight for America, which also helps cement them as American heroes, and indeed comics themselves are very much viewed as an American art form and medium. That type of Western comic. Of course, there are different types around the world. Manga, manhwa, bande dessinée, just to name a few. Now, just as pie, specifically apple, had come to be associated with America, so too had Superman. In the 1940s, his radio serial introduced the catchphrase, "Truth, Justice, and the American Way," further cementing the concept that Superman was fundamentally linked with American ideals, or the aspirational ones that people hoped the country could embody. So it isn't too big a leap to see how the Man of Steel came to have liking, or in some cases loving, pie as a background personality trait, or how it's stuck over time as creators cast back to core principles of Superman to either embrace or subvert.
Alaska. Lemon meringue pie. Thank you very much.
Now, Superman doesn't constantly fly around loudly proclaiming his love of pie, even though now I kind of wish he did. But if there is an eating scene or a diner scene or something in passing, it's not uncommon for him to comment on liking pie or be seen enjoying it. With Superman's history and his iconography, in many ways it's natural to consciously or unconsciously marry these two concepts, Superman and apple pie. It can be a subtle way of showcasing some of the character's roots and values by which he was created and what he is meant to aspire to or espouse. And of course, people also have fun with it and lambast it.
I said, give me my pie!
I'll take that pie to go.
But in order to make fun of Superman loving pie, the idea has to be entrenched in some way inside of his lore, at least a little bit. This is one of those little character accents that has worked its way into the character over time, and it works on many levels. It can add layers of meaning to the character, or just be a quick little relatable side note that people can identify with, whether or not they recognize or acknowledge the deeper symbolism behind it. Even for those who don't recognize or acknowledge this as some kind of deeper symbolism, it doesn't come across as odd or out of place or novel, the idea that Superman would enjoy pie. In fact, for some, just based on the character inside of canon itself, it makes sense because he's from Kansas, the Midwest. But again, those associations are harkening back a bit to that pie history. It's all coming together, like how in that Young Justice scene, Batman is eating cake. Devil's food cake. Let them eat cake, because he's rich, think about it. Even though it's very doubtful she ever actually said that, it's probably apocryphal, but the concept of cake and wealth, it's stuck. Superman loves pie, just like he frequents eating at diners, drinking milkshakes, eating burgers, playing baseball on his covers. But those are just my thoughts and I want to hear yours. Do you agree that there's a depth, another layer to Superman enjoying pie? Or do you think he just likes pie? Stop reading into it. Where do you stand on pie while you're at it? There's a bit of a fascination in general with Superman eating things. He kept pretzels in his cape pocket. There's that whole series, Superman vs. Meshi, where he goes around eating at different restaurants in Japan. It's the little things that spark joy. Let's chat down below. And while you're down there, please do all YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time today to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. We're getting set up, so this set's gonna get even more exciting, and I will see you back with another video very soon. Bye-bye.